Hello, everybody. It's Rob again, and welcome to another member talk. We're excited about today's topic. We have Walt Patrick from Hurlan Forest that's going to be joining us. But before he gets on, I wanted to chat with you briefly. Washington State Funeral Directors Association has seen a very high increase of people that are doing things in and around funeral service but are not actual funeral homes. And so we've actually created a new membership opportunity for folks to join the association. We're calling that Funeral Partners. And Walt and Hurlan Forest is one of our newest members in the Funeral Partner program. Hi, Walt. Good morning. How are you today?
Great. Good morning.
Good to have you on here. Happy and excited to get you a part of the membership. Tell me a little bit about Hurlan Forest. Tell me where is Hurlan Forest located?
We're in what we jokingly refer to extreme northern Oregon. We're on the north side of the Columbia River. So we're just 80 miles east of Portland, right off of Interstate 84, fairly easy access. And our challenge, one of the things we're reaching out to the organization for, is help for the Washington people to know that we are here and ready to be of service to them.
So Hurlan Forest is a little bit more than just what some people would call a green burial cemetery. There's a lot to Hurlan Forest. Kind of give us a background of it, if you will.
Sure. We've been developing this land for 32 years. The larger organization is the Windward Education and Research Center, a 501c nonprofit sustainability research facility. And we've dedicated, because those of us doing this are getting of a certain age, want to leave. In Washington, you can't bury someone on outside of a cemetery. And so we said, okay, let's look into what it takes to be able to have a cemetery as part of the 126 acres that we're developing. And so we started about 13 years ago working through this process, because there's a lot of paperwork and there's the endowments and all the stuff in that to make it all work. And so we've been licensed and interring people for about 3 years now. And we've kind of kept a low profile because we wanted to be really confident about what we were doing, because we're trying to bring permaculture techniques to the interment process. And so the details of that. So we've gone kind of slow, but we feel that at 3 years now, we're pretty solid in it and wanting to reach out and expand our ability to provide the service to other people.
So permaculture techniques, what are you referencing there? What does that mean?
Well, there's a saying that you can eat from the hazel tree that you plant, and you can eat from the walnut tree that your father planted, and you can eat from the chestnut tree your grandfather planted. I mean, having trees and forest work provide a significant amount of the resources that a community needs, not just timber, but also food and fiber and just green space and stuff. For example, instead of using riding mowers with burning fossil fuels, we have sheep. And the sheep are happy to go in and be our groundskeeper. And it's really tough to trim the grass around a tree, but the sheep have got it all down pat. So we use natural systems to sustain the forest, to develop the forest, and interring remains is part of the process of revitalizing the land, because the traditional forests up here, we're at 2,000 feet. And we're right where the rain runs out. So on the western end of our county, it's 60 inches of rain a year. On the eastern end of our county, over to where y'all are, it's like 6 inches of rain down here. And so we're at 26 inches. So we have ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, oak. We have a large, diverse variety in our forest. And so we're looking at cultivating that. We're evolving a living memorial where the entire forest area manifests the joy of the recurrence of the life cycle, so that people who want to go back into the biosphere can do so readily. And part of that has to do with the interment. Part of it has to do with things that most people don't think about, such as the mycological network that is the heart of the forest. Most people don't understand that about half of the biomass in a forest is underground. It's fungus. It's the mycological network. And so how to incorporate all of that into properly handling the remains is kind of our specialty.
So how did you, Walt Patrick, how did you get involved in all this? Where did this come from? Was this your idea, or was this a collective group of people talking that said, let's offer this as an opportunity for individuals that may want to have interment here? How did that come up?
Well, this is an outgrowth of ancient practices. There's nothing really novel about natural burial, and the concept of transforming a forest and relying it. The name Hurlan Forest refers to a book published in 1915, which postulated a society based not on fossil fuel powered agriculture, but on the stewardship of the forest, where the forest provides the food and the fuel and the fiber needed to sustain a community without getting involved in the international energy resource war thing. I mean, how do we, this is kind of a growth of people who just did not want to be part of that dynamic, and to say, okay, how can we sustain communities in deep country so they can control their own resources? Because if you don't control, if a community runs out of energy, it stops. I mean, you've got to have that, and deep country people are at the end of a supply chain. So how to develop, to use the forest, particularly in Western Washington, where you have a tremendous amount of woody biomass being grown each year, and it chokes the forests and makes them vulnerable to catastrophic wildfires. And so how to use that woody biomass as a way to provide resources for the community is what our long-term research is about. And so it's just, how do we use that? And our orientation is that, dying is part of living, and being part of helping people see that the remains are handled in a way that reconnects them with life, instead of a cemetery being somewhere over there that's outside of the community. We envision a cemetery where people can go. They don't take flowers to the cemetery, they bring flowers home from the cemetery. We take delight in turning graves into bouquets, and that's particularly beautiful right now because all the daffodils and the orchids and stuff are not the orchids, but the lilies are coming up right now. It's really fun to go out there almost every other day. Plus, being at the transition point, we get the wildflowers from the wetlands and the drylands all coming together here. There are services that will provide flowers for the lobby of corporations and change the flowers out each week. Well, it's kind of like that here, because each week we have a different wildflower coming into bloom, and it's just fascinating to watch. So allowing people to come up and camp out. I mean, often one of the things that we get, there's a lot of romance it's in our cemetery, where couples come to have a resting place that's together, and we're pioneering some techniques on that called Two Hearts Together Forever. And so the wives, often it's the husband has died, the wife is looking for a place, and they'll come out and camp and sleep and dream over the spot in order to feel that it truly is where they want to be. And so we encourage that kind of stuff. We want it to be, we have picnic tables, we have a campground. Even in this COVID time frame where people can't have their funerals, we have a whole campground, and we're set up for people to come and have celebration ceremonies when the time is lifted, and to do it on an ongoing annual basis. We would love to have people have their kind of a family reunion, particularly over Memorial Day weekend. We're trying to develop that concept where people get together to remember and tell the stories and sing the songs and celebrate the lives. And we want to provide a place for that. So it's not just a matter they're buying a grave, they're buying, it's almost like a timeshare kind of thing, where they can come and spend time in the forest and camp out. Now, we don't allow strangers to camp actually in the cemetery. We have an adjoining 40-acre campground that has camping facilities, summer showers, and various other facilities where people are welcome to camp and then visit that. But the people who are choosing to be buried in the forest, we refer to as guardians. They're using their remains to protect that forest from commercial development, because after we're gone, the bodies will still be there. And so once you start burying human remains in a property, it's very difficult to then develop that commercially. And so the guardians who come, we encourage them to go ahead and camp in the forest at their gravesite, and which is located in the trees. We're not a regimented type cemetery where you have a grave in row 4, 6. Our locations are among the trees. The trees pick where the burials are. The trees work out their relationships with the other trees because they're fighting over sunlight and water, etc. So there's space in among the trees where the drip lines come together, and that's where the interments happen. So it's a very spacious, very open facility where people can come and just relax and go through the grieving process. It's not a matter of recreational camping. It's almost a therapeutic kind of camping that we feel is really important, and we do our best to support that.
So yeah, I like how you said you're not regimented. You know, so many cemeteries are very, well, that's a great word, regimented. They straight line grave lines, straight grave sites, you know, cut grass. It's very beautiful, very park-like, but you guys have it completely different. And you're doing something, it sounds like, that is as old as mankind with the natural burial. But as I understand it from talking with you in the past, you also are providing, you're not just digging a grave and placing somebody in that grave. You have a process that will help spur on the growth of the forest through a reduction. I guess you could say a natural organic reduction.
Oh, indeed.
As we're calling it now.
Yeah,
now you had some photos that you have. Can you share those with us on here?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and look at that.
That'll give us sort of an idea of what you're talking about, won't it?
Yes, it will.
All right.
All right. There's the. You would find this slideshow on our website, right up in the top line. It talks about videos and slideshow. And so if you click on that, you'll come right to this slideshow. So we want a funeral director to be able to refer people who have questions right there and get some idea, well, what would it be like to be buried in the Hurlan forest? And so this is a quick set of slides. This is essentially the lecture slides that I've been giving when I give a talk at Lake Washington or Mount Hood or Miami-Dade College. So we've been preparing this for the students who are curious about this kind of intense natural burial. So
now,
let me walk through that. This is a quick slide.
Well, real quick, did you say you've presented this here locally at Lake Washington and my alma mater, Mount Hood? You also presented this at Miami-Dade as well?
Indeed, and we're happy to reach out because we have almost a missionary zeal about protecting the forests and helping ensure that they are maintained and aren't subject to catastrophic wildfire.
Sure. Is that, and just, I know this is kind of a side note here, but for Miami-Dade, that kind of Miami metro area, is that something where they're seeing a lot of questions about wanting to have something like this in that particular area?
Well, beam burial is a ration. You know, we're in a situation where the majority of people are going with cremation. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we're looking at current rate around 75% of deaths are cremated. The Cremation Association of North America, the CANA, projects that we're heading toward 90% cremation up here in the Pacific Northwest. Right. And if you look at that by the inverse, for every 100 burials today, in a decade, they're saying that there are only going to be 40 burials, that it's so it's a matter of, I believe that the industry needs to aggressively look at alternative options for people to have a reason to go for burial as opposed to cremation. Or, I mean, there's cremation, the alkaline hydrolysis, the natural organic reduction stuff, and all of those, but none of those leave a locus of memory, a place where a person's remains are and their families and their, yeah. So we're trying to address that issue and provide a whole set of services in order to help keep burial alive.
Okay, I see. Sorry, I did, that just caught me, the Miami-Dade part, but please continue. I'd like to see the slideshow and kind of see different parts of the forest.
I'm going to go fairly quickly through some of these things. And so, like I said, I encourage you, anybody interested, to go back to the website and linger on it. But the reason for this slide is it shows in the distance, you can see Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and Oregon oak all growing side by side. It's a diversity forest that is more stable in the long run.
Okay. And real
this
quick,
is where we're at. We're up in the center of a plateau.
I think we're starting to get some feedback there just because of the proximities of where you're at and where I'm at. So we'll hopefully that all came through. But you were talking about the 3 different species there in the slide that was available.
Yep. Ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and Oregon oak, all growing in diversity, and all of those have different sub-ecosystems. So we're at this incredible mixing. It's almost like an environmental quilt rather than the blanket that you get in other areas where there's only one climax species, etc. And this is highly diverse. So you can see that we're up on top. This is the slopes of Mount Adams here. And you can see the Klickitat River running along, surrounding, creating this peninsula that Hurlan is located right here. And that's Mount Dist there. So the Columbia River running along there. So kind of give you an idea of the topography of where the Hurlan forest is. Our ambition is to turn all of this into protected forest. But, you know, that's all down the road.
Yeah.
So here is an interment from last fall, the family coming through the woods. This is the eastern forest within Hurlan. Hurlan has 3 different zones. This is a more open park-like area. Here they're bringing the remains out of our truck, moving to the grave. This woman was a Sufi, and they were doing some of the things that are particular to that faith. With the remains, they brought a bouquet from the celebration ceremony the night before, and that's there. So here, taking apart the bouquet and tossing the petals into the grave. And you can see the remains there. Now, you can see how tightly controlled the grave is. This is all scaled to create the effect that we want in the conversion of the remains into soil. So our soil has a lot of clay, and you can see how tightly the edges of the grave are done there. So we put down 6 inches of wood chips in the bottom of the grave, and the remains are laid to rest on top of that.
That grave doesn't look very deep. How deep do you guys typically go?
3.5 feet. So here, now we're bringing in 150 gallons of wood chips so that the remains are completely cocooned in wood chips. Now the wood chips are like, what we're striving for is the balance between carbon and nitrogen. So for the remains to be converted effectively, there's got to be carbon put in there, because the remains are high in nitrogen and the wood chips are low in nitrogen, and it's the balance of the two that allows the whole conversion process to go forward. And here you're seeing the family raking. We have these 355-gallon drums of wood chips per grave. And it's like a recipe, putting all the stuff together so that the biological process happens effectively. And just like in a normal funeral, often people will want to put a shovel full of dirt into the grave, etc. Well, in this case, it's just a matter of raking the wood chips in, and we find that people like to be involved in that. And so that's part of our process. So here's the grave with the wood chips in it. Now, at that end of the point, the grave is not complete, but at this point, we withdraw and allow the family to take whatever amount of time they want. They can take the rest of the day. We don't care. But we don't want somebody to fall in the grave and get hurt. Sure. So we go ahead and put a sheet of 3/4 plywood over the grave and leave the family to take their final farewells or whatever. And then after that, after they leave, we come back and put the cap on the grave. So we're adding another foot and a half of dirt on top of the grave to create a seal so that we have the compartment. Now this is a completed grave, and you'll notice that there are these pipes here, and the pipes serve two functions. The first off, this is natural organic reduction, and it requires oxygen and water to make it happen. So these are standard irrigation pipes. They've got little slots in them that allow us to put water down into the grave and to control the moisture level in the wood chips that are down there, and also to allow oxygen to work its way into the grave to control the production of methane that a corpse would normally produce underground. And so trying to convert it into carbon dioxide, which the plants all around will consume, rather than methane, which will then be a much more problematic greenhouse gas. So this is how the grave looks when it comes together. Now this interment happened in September, and so it wasn't until last month that we planted the tree on here. So part of that is that the wood chips create a water battery. This is part of the permaculture dimension of what we're talking about. So that we have a dry August and September, and the necessity is to help a tree getting started to get through those dry months. And we do that by using the wood chips for the purpose of holding water. The wood buried on there becomes like a water battery. And these pipes are how we recharge that water battery to make sure that the tree has what it needs. And by putting the water down below, we induce the tree to drop its roots down to get that water. Whereas if we watered the surface, we'd get superficial roots, and that's not going to help the tree survive in the dry months. So it's a whole complicated situation here that's crafted and designed to actually transform the remains into resources that will nourish the tree and maintain the vitality of the tree. We take that really seriously because people are wanting to have the miracle of rebirth of life as a way to cope with the loss involved in the death. And if the tree dies, it's just like a double blow. So sure. We are just really fanatical about working out whatever we have to do to make that tree success. There are a lot of people who will plant a tree or sell you an urn that has a tree seed in it or something like that. And it's all well and good, but we think there's a lot more to it to actually making it work. And just as, a funeral director knows, there's a lot more to embalming than just, this superficial thing that people want to think about. Same thing for actually creating a tree life transition. And so those are some of the details of it there.
Now, do those...
this is an example. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, do those pipes stay in indefinitely, or do those pipes come out at some point?
We haven't, at about 5 to 10 years, our hope is that, yeah, we won't have, we assume that we're going to have to be providing supplemental water to the tree for at least 3 years. And so what happens after that, once that tree is set up and establishing and growing vigorously, then the water is going to help. And so we expect to continue to, because again, we're trying to build a living memorial, and we're trying to help these trees be productive. And so providing the water to them is going to be something we're going to want to keep doing. So it's part of our perpetual care will be facilitating the vigorous growth of these trees,
Okay.
because that's what's going to manifest the diversity of the forest. So, 10 years down the road, I don't know. We'll see what the biology needs at that point.
Sure.
So here's an example of the type of monument that's common. This is done by Robert Orr out of Vancouver. We don't get involved with this, but it's the kind of memorial that is very welcome at Hurlan Forest. Bob's quite an expert at this stuff. But this is the actual formal monument or marker for the grave, where it has the name of the interred, the serial number of the contract, and the dimensions for which the grave, and then we take the GPS reading of this location so the family can find the grave by just using a GPS unit. 5, 10, 20 years down the line. This is mounted on top of a piece of rebar, and you can easily find it with a metal detector if the GPS is lost. So this is how a grave is permanently marked in our records. So here's another example of an interment with a shroud. And here's the sons putting the wood chips in around their dad. Mm-hmm. This is an example of last winter in March. We had a huge snowstorm, and there were places where the snow was like 2 feet deep getting to where the cemetery is. So we built a sled, and the young members of the family got in there and did like a snowshoe, like a sled dog, pulling grandpa to the grave. And so that was quite an interesting variation on the theme.
Now, does that wicker container get buried with the individual too?
Yes. In this case, yes. That's what's just about to happen right here. And then back in the spring, the family comes and does a celebration, because there were older members of the family who weren't up to it's 3/8 of a mile from the county road to where this grave is. And that was too much for a lot of the older members of the family. And so come back in May and have a gathering and a celebration. And so, and this would be very pertinent to today where we've got to go direct to burial to then have the remains interred and then have the celebration as soon as the rules are lifted and people can gather.
So, Walt, just out of curiosity, because we see this a lot where I'm at, frozen ground. I noticed that was in winter and it looked like a glorious day with the blue sky and everything. But do you get into the situation with frozen ground and having to try to dig a grave in the frozen ground like that? Or is it just removal of the snow and able to have the grave dug at that point?
Well, that's a great point. And the two areas that we're concerned about are August, September, because you can see how much clay there is in our ground. It's really hard to dig the ground at that point. And so the same thing in January and February, where the result is that there are two things here. One is pre-need. When somebody comes in and decides they want to become a guardian, they pick their spot in the forest. It's not like we assign it to them. They find a spot they like. And at that point, we go ahead and pre-dig the grave and, fill it full of wood chips all the way up. And that way it's very simple to open the grave in just a matter of hours so that if someone has pre-picked their area. Now in the pre-need, or rather the at-need situation, we're sensitive on that. And after having gone through this issue last year, we went ahead and used this nice gentle winter to go ahead and dig extra graves in appropriate spots to Hurlan Forest, that beautiful open park area that I showed you, the more dense forest, and then this area here, which is an ancient oak forest. That oak tree in the center of the picture is over 300 years old. And so we find that's a very popular area for people to be. So we have graves that are pre-dug in each of those areas. And on our website, if you click on direct natural burial, it will take you to each of those locations, and people can, wherever they are, they can be in Brooklyn, and look around and decide, okay, this is the spot that I want. And we can do an interment there immediately.
Wow, amazing.
So this is how the grave ends up. This is, so you can see we mounded up a little bit because it's going to go down. And the extra grave we put in a chevron downhill of the grave in order to catch the runoff and channel that water into the grave. So that, again, to help sustain the tree is what we're doing there.
Gotcha.
Here is this is a pre-need purchase. This person is alive and well down in Bend, Oregon, and comes up periodically to camp. And so that's the location she picked. Now we put all these daffodils in for a couple of reasons. I love the look of them, but also the ground squirrels hate them. The roots and the bulbs are poisonous to the ground squirrels, so they leave the grave alone. Because otherwise we're building a condominium for ground squirrels, and they say, wow, these people have done all the work for us, we'll just move in. And
Sure.
so that's our way of keeping the ground squirrels out without having to use a rodent poison or anything else like that. The daffodils are effective. And we're there year round, and the forest is an actually beautiful place. And so we encourage people to come up and visit year round and get to enjoy the beauty of it. In the spring, the joy of coming out, one of the things we do a lot of is this is a saffron crocus. And right in here, these little stamens is the spice of saffron that you buy it. And so a number of our graves have hundreds of saffron bulbs on them, so people can come and gather the saffron and take it home and have a big ceremonial meal, invite friends over to enjoy the saffron rice, etc., off of the grave of a loved one. So also, because we're a sustainability research center, we use animals to convert the things we don't want to eat into the things we do want to eat. And this is an example. We do a lot of work with rabbits. 4 of the rabbit does can outproduce a Black Angus steer for meat for the table. So it is a powerful sustainability technique. But it's also a matter of how do we sustain the people involved in dealing with the death thing. Because there's a deep psychological drain. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, of dealing with the death around you. And so by intentionally surrounding ourselves with life and birth, etc., it provides a counterbalance to that to help keep our people comfortable and capable of being there for people in mourning without it hammering them on their own emotional feelings. So rabbits and goats and sheep are an integral part of what we do. And here's our herd queen with her latest baby there. This baby just had her baby last week. So here's also the sheep that I mentioned are part of our ground crew for trimming the grasses around the trees and so on to keep it from, because if you don't trim the trees, it'll build up and it's a fire risk. And so instead of employing groundkeepers, we employ the ones who are professionals at it and have been doing it for millennia. So that's just a quick brush of our version of natural burial, which is in fact in line for the natural organic reduction that is just now coming online. Coin TV out of Portland did a very 2-minute, very nice little video that's available right there. So
sure.
If people want to, again, get a live tour of what we're doing, it's right there on our website.
And so looking at this, the website there is at the top, hurlandforest.org. Is that right? Is that where we can find it?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll actually add that to this so people have a link and able to reach out to you. But what a great option. Now, you are not a funeral home.
Correct.
Nor claim to be a funeral home. You actually work with funeral homes, as I understand. Right. So when a death happens, whether that be in the state of Washington or wherever, the funeral home contacts you and says, we have an individual that has selected to have natural burial at Hurlan Forest. And then that you spring into action to work as that provider to help get them there, or to help with facilitate the burial process. You do kind of that end stage of it. Is that right?
Correct. And we're interested in doing whatever will help the funeral director go forward. For example, there were funeral directors in Oregon who thought that the funeral director had to accompany the remains to the cemetery. And we contacted the Oregon Mortuary Board and got actual confirmation that no, once the funeral director transfers the remains to us, then they no longer are responsible for it, and then we can pick it up. We're ready to transport from anywhere in Washington, Oregon, or Idaho, and we're only 80 miles, actually less than 80 miles away from the Portland airport, and remains can be flown in from all over. And so, like I said, from the time the plane lands, we can have the remains interred within hours. And so for the people of the faith communities that want immediate burial, immediate natural burial, we're standing by ready to deal with that. So how can we help? If the funeral director wants to handle transport, that's fine with us, but we're ready to take that part and move forward at whatever the funeral director is the boss in this. So they're the professional that we're here to help.
Well, if you can, let's go ahead and take your screen share off so we can see you again. But I know we've talked a lot about burial. What about cremated remains, or even now here in a few days, we'll have the opportunity, at least in the state of Washington, to have alkaline hydrolysis. How's that going to work? Can we bury cremated remains and people that have undergone the alkaline hydrolysis process there at the forest?
Great question. Great question. Let me break that down. There's on cremation, we already have an entire meadow that is for scattering remains. We have experience in processing the cremains to the point where they won't hurt a tree because they're highly alkaline, and if they're not processed appropriately, they'll burn the roots, and the tree won't be able to access those minerals. So there's whole details of that. So yes, we do have on our price list, it talks about interment of cremains and also the scattering of ashes. And so those are two things, right? And our price list, by the way, is right there on the website. So it's easy to find. But yes, that is something we commonly do about people wanting to put their ashes in the forest, which allows the minerals in the body, particularly the magnesium and the potassium and the phosphorus, to get back accessible to the tree. The trees get all the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen that they want from the environment. It's those micronutrients that limit the growth of the forest. So cremains are very welcome.
Sure.
Now in alkaline hydrolysis, we've got a problem there that there's about 300 gallons of effluent that comes out of that process. And we've been talking with a couple of alkaline hydrolysis people about bringing those resources up here to the forest, because the alternative is flushing that down the drain.
Yeah.
And so we're open to it. It's just that there's cost involved, because 300 gallons of water weighs a ton, literally. Yeah. So you've got to have a double axle trailer, proper setup, and so on. So we're open to do that, but we've not had anybody that wanted to set up and to do that. So we're going to sort it out, and we're talking with some of the people involved, such as Micah, about the possibility of using the reduction material on our pastures and our forest, etc. So sure. It's an exciting time. We'll see how all that works out.
Yeah, there's so many changes. And so one thing, just so people that maybe don't understand, you said the word effluent, and that just so people know is the terminology is the byproduct of alkaline hydrolysis. Is that right? It's right. The liquid that is returned from that process.
Yes, and we're talking about 300 gallons, and it's nutrient rich, and so on. So to get that into some place where it can do some good, currently some of the stuff in the material in Portland with First Call is put out on grass farms and is doing marvelously. And so there are resources out of that. On the other hand, it's a complicated area, but we're certainly open to helping people get back to the environment. Going home by another way is a way I like to think about it. And how can we help?
Well, we'll have to wrap this up because we're getting a little long, but I love what you said about how planting a tree, it's not just as simple as planting a tree, because unfortunately, I think a lot of people think that, and we've seen stuff online where, they can use these, they say they use these pod things to put you in, and we found out that's not the case. That doesn't really work, and those don't even really exist. But what you guys are doing is actually helping to sustain and grow this tree into a forest, which is, the other comment you made of if the tree dies, if you just plant it and the tree will die, which is most likely going to be the case due to lack of water and other things, it's reliving that same death over and over again. I know a lot of people that have done that and have gone out and planted a tree, and then the tree dies within a year and they're back wondering what to do. You guys have kind of perfected this. You've got with the wood chips, the vents where you can add the water and things. You've really put a lot of thought into this process. And, it's great to know that there are people like you that are out there that are providing these options for families.
Well, we've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, we're fairly new at running a cemetery, but fortunately, cemeteries are not new technology. But how to adapt that and use the permaculture techniques in order to create a positive outcome. And that's what we're excited about. And we're looking for people to help support and guide that concept, and so that it can be a working model that can be adopted all around.
Well, Walt Patrick, Hurlan Forest, I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your story with us. Thank you for maybe teaching us some new things as well. I want to thank you as well for being an innovator and one of the first of our funeral provider members to the WSFDA, and welcome you as well as a member. And looking forward to talking with you again in the near future. Good.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. Enjoyed. You've already been a lot of help to us. At DEF CON, the counsel that you gave us was very helpful, and we're deeply appreciative of it.
Good. Well, if you want to get a hold of Walt, again, it's hurlandforest.org. Is that right?
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks again, Walt. We enjoyed having you, and we'll do this again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.